The Arizona Territory lay beneath a blazing summer sun in the late 1870s, where endless stretches of dusty earth met jagged mountains on the horizon. The land was beautiful in its harshness, but it offered little mercy to those who had no family, no money, and nowhere to belong. 19-year-old Clara Whitmore knew that truth all too well. Only 6 months earlier, she had lived a quiet life on her father's small ranch outside Tucson. It had never been a prosperous home, but it was filled with laughter, fresh bread, and evenings spent watching the sun disappear behind the desert hills. Her father had always promised that no matter how difficult life became, they would face it together. Then sickness swept through the territory. Within a matter of weeks, it claimed his life. His passing left Clara completely alone. The ranch had already struggled under years of drought, and her father had borrowed money from local traders just to survive another season. Clara assumed the debts would be settled once she sold the cattle and the land. She was wrong. The largest creditor was Silas Granger, a trader whose smile never reached his cold gray eyes. He arrived at the ranch with neatly folded papers and 2 armed men standing behind him. "I'm afraid your father's debt has grown larger than you realize," he said calmly. Clara looked over the figures. "They can't be right. They're legal. There must be some mistake." "There isn't." She searched every page, her hands trembling. Interest had multiplied the debt until it far exceeded everything the ranch was worth. "I'll work," Clara pleaded. "I'll pay every cent." Granger only smiled. "You don't have years to repay it." Fear settled heavily inside her. "What happens if I can't?" The trader folded the papers. "Then I collect in another way." 2 days later, Clara found herself riding in the back of a supply wagon, her wrists tied loosely with rope. She had not been thrown into chains, but she understood she was no longer free. Granger had arranged a meeting far from town, near an abandoned trading post where several Apache riders waited silently beneath towering cottonwood trees. Their leader sat motionless atop a dark horse. His broad shoulders were wrapped in a faded blanket despite the heat. Long black hair fell across his back, and a deep scar stretched from his temple to his jaw. No one spoke when he approached. Even Granger's guards lowered their eyes. "Dakota," the trader greeted with forced confidence. The Apache warrior gave only a single nod. His face revealed nothing. Granger untied Clara and pushed her forward. "The agreement is complete." Clara stumbled before catching herself. She stared at the warrior, convinced she was looking into the eyes of the man who would ruin whatever remained of her life. She had heard stories. Settlers whispered his name with fear around campfires. They claimed Dakota never smiled. Never forgave. Never showed mercy to anyone who crossed him. Her heart pounded as Granger accepted a heavy leather pouch filled with silver coins. Without another word, the trader climbed back into his wagon. He never looked back. Clara watched the wagon disappear into the desert until it became nothing more than a cloud of dust. She felt utterly abandoned. The Apache warriors surrounded her without speaking. Dakota finally stepped from his horse. She expected him to grab her roughly or bind her hands again. Instead, he simply cut the rope from her wrists with a hunting knife. The rough fibers fell harmlessly into the sand. "You can walk," he said quietly. His English was slow but clear. Nothing more. No threats. No orders. Only those 3 words. Confused, Clara followed the group as they traveled toward the distant mountains. The journey lasted until sunset. No one mistreated her. Whenever the riders stopped to drink, someone silently handed her water. When they paused to rest, food was placed beside her without a word. Dakota never once looked directly at her. It was as though she were simply another traveler under his care. That puzzled Clara more than cruelty ever could. Several days later they reached the Apache camp nestled deep inside a hidden valley. Children paused their games to stare. Women whispered among themselves. Older warriors exchanged uneasy glances. Everyone seemed surprised to see a white woman riding beside Dakota. An elderly woman stepped forward. She spoke quietly in Apache. Dakota answered with only a few words before walking away. The woman gently motioned for Clara to follow. As Clara entered the camp, she overheard whispers she could not fully understand, though one English sentence reached her ears. "He bought her." Another voice answered softly. "For revenge." Clara lowered her head. If those whispers were true, her future held nothing but sorrow. Yet as the sun disappeared beyond the cliffs, she noticed Dakota standing alone on a ridge overlooking the valley. His expression was unreadable, his posture as rigid as stone. To everyone around him, he was a ruthless warrior with a heart as cold as the desert night. Clara believed it too. She had no way of knowing that beneath the silence and scars lay a secret burden, and that the man everyone feared had not purchased her to destroy her life, but to save it. The first morning in the Apache camp began long before sunrise. Clara awoke to the faint crackling of cooking fires and the soft murmur of voices drifting through the cool desert air. As the eastern sky turned shades of pink and gold, the hidden valley slowly came alive. Women carried water from a nearby stream. Children chased one another between the lodges, laughing despite the hardships of frontier life. Elderly men sharpened tools while young warriors prepared their horses for the day's work. Everything felt unfamiliar. Clara sat quietly outside the small lodge she had been given, unsure of where she belonged. She expected suspicious stares, but instead most people simply watched her with cautious curiosity before returning to their tasks. The elderly woman who had welcomed her the night before approached carrying a wooden bowl filled with warm corn porridge. "My name is Ayana," she said in careful English. "You eat." Clara accepted the bowl gratefully. "Thank you." Ayana smiled gently. "You are safe here." Those words surprised Clara. Safe. She had expected imprisonment, not kindness. Over the following days, Ayana patiently taught Clara simple Apache words and customs. She showed her how to grind corn, weave reeds into baskets, and prepare herbs gathered from the surrounding hills. Though Clara often stumbled over the unfamiliar language, the older woman laughed warmly instead of correcting her harshly. Little by little, Clara began earning the trust of the women in the camp. Dakota, however, remained as distant as ever. He left before dawn each morning with the hunting parties or patrols and often returned after sunset. During meals he rarely spoke, eating quietly before disappearing into the darkness beyond the fires. Whenever Clara thanked him for allowing her to stay, he merely nodded. His silence frustrated her. She could not understand the man who had purchased her freedom from one prison only to surround himself with invisible walls. One afternoon Clara witnessed something that challenged everything she believed about him. An elderly widow struggled to carry a bundle of firewood nearly twice her size. Before anyone could offer help, Dakota stepped forward. Without speaking, he lifted the heavy bundle onto his own shoulders and carried it all the way to her lodge. The widow touched his arm in gratitude. He simply inclined his head and walked away. Later that same evening, Clara noticed him quietly placing strips of dried venison outside another family's lodge before disappearing into the shadows. "No one saw him," Clara whispered. "They were not meant to," Ayana replied. Clara looked puzzled. "He always helps them." Ayana nodded. "The widows. The children. The old ones. He does not like thanks." The image of the ruthless warrior described by settlers suddenly felt incomplete. A few days later, Clara wandered toward the edge of the valley while gathering herbs with Ayana. Hidden among tall cottonwoods stood several carefully arranged stone markers. Graves. Fresh wildflowers rested upon each one. Clara noticed Dakota kneeling silently before them. His broad shoulders remained perfectly still as he placed a carved wooden toy beside the smallest grave. He stayed there for several minutes before quietly walking away without noticing the women watching from a distance. When he disappeared into the trees, Clara turned toward Ayanna. Who is buried there? The older woman's expression became solemn. His wife. She pointed toward the smaller grave. And little daughter. Clara's heart sank. Ayanna continued softly. Many winters ago, soldiers came while the warriors hunted. They burned lodges. They showed no mercy. Clara lowered her eyes. They were killed. Ayanna nodded. Dakota found them too late. Silence settled between them. The man you see now, Ayanna whispered, was not always made of stone. That evening Clara watched Dakota differently. His scarred face no longer seemed frightening. Instead, it looked exhausted. The hardness in his eyes no longer spoke only of anger. It spoke of grief that had never been allowed to heal. Several nights later, as Clara returned from the stream carrying water, she found Dakota repairing a broken saddle beneath the glow of the campfire. Gathering her courage, she approached him. "May I ask you something?" He looked up briefly. "You may. Why did you buy me?" His hands stopped moving. For a long moment, only the sound of the fire filled the silence. Finally, he answered. "I did not buy you." Clara frowned. "I saw the trader take your silver. I paid for your freedom." She stared at him, unable to understand. Dakota's voice remained calm. "Silas Granger planned to sell you farther south. Men there buy people who never return." A chill ran through Clara. "I heard him speak of it." He met her eyes for the first time. "I could not stop him without starting bloodshed." "So, you paid him instead?" Dakota nodded once. "I do not own you, Clara." Her breath caught. "When you choose to leave, no one here will stop you." The word struck her harder than any blow. Every fear she had carried since the trading post suddenly felt uncertain. The man she had believed to be her captor had never intended to possess her at all. He had rescued her from a fate far darker than she had imagined. For the first time since arriving in the hidden valley, Clara looked beyond Dakota's stern expression and saw not a ruthless warrior, but a lonely man carrying the unbearable weight of loss. Beneath his cold silence was a heart buried beneath years of sorrow, a heart that, despite everything it had endured, still remembered how to show mercy. The peaceful rhythm of life in the hidden valley lasted only a few short weeks. Although Clara had begun learning Apache customs, she never forgot that beyond the mountains, men like Silas Granger still knew her name. Every distant hoofbeat made her wonder whether someone had come looking for her. One warm afternoon, several young children were gathering wild berries near the edge of the valley while Clara and Ayanna collected medicinal herbs nearby. The air was still, broken only by birdsong and the rustling of cottonwood leaves. Then Dakota appeared on horseback. His expression changed the moment he noticed fresh tracks pressed into the sandy ground. He dismounted without a word and knelt beside the prince. Several horses. Boots instead of moccasins. And they were recent. He touched the dirt, then looked toward the western ridge. "They found us," he said quietly. A sharp whistle echoed across the valley. Within moments, Apache warriors sprang into action. Mothers hurried children toward the safety of the lodges while the older men gathered bows, rifles, and ammunition. The peaceful camp transformed into a fortress in only a few minutes. Clara felt panic rise inside her. "Who are they?" she asked. Dakota tightened the strap on his rifle. "Not soldiers." His eyes narrowed. "Outlaws." As if to confirm his words, a gunshot cracked through the canyon. The sound echoed from cliff to cliff. A frightened horse neighed. Another shot followed. Then came shouting. A dozen armed riders burst through a narrow pass, firing wildly into the air to spread fear before they reached the camp. Their leader wore a black hat pulled low over his face. A cruel smile spread across his lips. "There she is," he shouted, pointing directly at Clara. The traitor wasn't lying. Clara's blood ran cold. They're after me. Dakota stepped in front of her. No. His voice was calm but firm. They are after money. Without another word, he drew his rifle. The first outlaw charged toward the center of the camp. Dakota fired once. The rider's horse reared, throwing its rider to the ground before racing away into the desert. Chaos erupted. Apache warriors moved swiftly between rocks and trees, using every part of the landscape as cover. Their arrows and rifle shots came from unexpected directions, forcing the attackers into confusion. Clara had never seen a battle before. Smoke filled the air. Children cried. Women hurried the elderly into protected shelters. As she helped Ayanna lead several frightened youngsters toward safety, another gunshot rang out. One little boy stumbled and fell beside a wagon, frozen with fear as an outlaw galloped straight toward him. Without thinking, Clara ran. She threw herself over the child just as a bullet struck the wooden wheel inches above her head, sending splinters flying. The outlaw raised his revolver again. Before he could fire, Dakota's horse thundered between them. Dakota leaped from the saddle with astonishing speed. His tomahawk flashed through the air, knocking the pistol from the outlaw's hand. A single powerful strike sent the man crashing into the dust. The remaining attackers hesitated. They had expected frightened villagers. Instead, they faced disciplined warriors defending their families. Their leader cursed loudly. Fall back. One by one, the outlaws retreated toward the pass, firing a few desperate shots before disappearing into the rocky hills. Silence slowly returned. Only the crackle of small fires and the groans of the wounded remained. Clara looked down at the trembling little boy still clinging to her arm. "It's all right," she whispered. "You're safe now." Dakota approached, his breathing heavy. "You saved him." Clara looked up. "I couldn't leave him." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, for the first time since they had met, Dakota's stern expression softened ever so slightly. It wasn't quite a smile. But it was close. That evening, as the camp counted its blessings and mourned its injuries, Clara noticed blood soaking through the sleeve of Dakota's buckskin shirt. "You've been hurt." "It's nothing." "It isn't nothing." Ignoring his protest, she guided him to Ayanna's lodge, where clean water and healing herbs had already been prepared. Dakota sat quietly while Clara carefully washed the wound on his upper arm. "It will sting," she warned. "I have known worse." She smiled faintly. "I believe that." As she wrapped the fresh bandage around his arm, she noticed countless old scars crossing his shoulders and chest, silent reminders of battles survived and losses endured. "You risked your life today," she said softly. Dakota looked toward the fire burning outside the lodge. "So did you." "I only protected a child." "So did I." Their eyes met. For the first time, Clara no longer saw the feared Apache warrior everyone spoke about. She saw a man willing to stand between danger and those who could not defend themselves. And Dakota no longer saw the frightened young woman he had rescued from a cruel traitor. He saw someone whose courage matched her compassion. Neither of them spoke the feelings beginning to grow between them. There was no need. Sometimes, trust was not built with words, but with the quiet moments after the battle had ended, when two wounded hearts realized they no longer carried their burdens alone. The valley slowly recovered from the outlaw attack. Burned wagons were repaired, damaged lodges rebuilt, and the laughter of children gradually returned. Yet beneath the surface, uneasiness lingered. Everyone understood that enemies who had discovered the hidden camp might return with greater numbers. Clara worked alongside the women each day, grinding corn, mending clothing, and tending to the wounded. She no longer felt like a stranger. The children greeted her with bright smiles, and even the older women invited her to share stories around the evening fires. Only a few warriors still watched her with suspicion. The most outspoken among them was Nantan, a proud young warrior who had once hoped to become Dakota's second-in-command. Strong and fearless, Nantan admired Takoda's skill in battle but secretly resented the respect the chief received. To him, Clara was a dangerous outsider. One afternoon, while several warriors returned from scouting the mountains, Nantan noticed Clara standing beside Takoda, handing him a fresh water skin after a long ride. Takoda accepted it with a quiet nod. It was a simple gesture. But to Nantan, it was proof that the white woman had grown too close to the leader. That evening he gathered several warriors near the council fire. Since she came, he said, outlaws have found our valley. One warrior frowned. They followed the traitor. Or she told them where to look. The accusation spread through the camp like smoke carried by the wind. Though no one had evidence, fear often gave strength to rumors. By the following morning, whispers followed Clara wherever she walked. She noticed conversation stopping as she approached. Smiles disappeared. Even some children were called back by their parents before they could speak to her. The change broke her heart. Ayana placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Truth walks slowly, the elder woman said. Lies run fast. Before Clara could answer, a scout rode into camp at full speed. Horses, he shouted. Many horses. The warriors rushed toward the western ridge. Instead of outlaws, a group of cavalry soldiers emerged from the desert, led by none other than Silas Granger. The traitor sat proudly beside the commanding officer, pointing toward the Apache camp. There, he cried. That's where they're keeping her. Clara's heart pounded. He found me. The cavalry halted just beyond bow range. Their captain rode forward beneath a white flag. We've come for Miss Clara Whitmore, he announced. She's being held against her will. Several warriors glanced suspiciously toward Clara. Nantan stepped forward. Perhaps now we know why she came. Takoda's eyes hardened. No. Nantan ignored him. Let her go. If she rides with them willingly, we will know the truth. The camp fell silent. Every eye turned toward Clara. The cavalry captain extended his hand. Miss Whitmore, come with us. You'll be safe. Silas Granger smiled confidently. See. I've come to rescue you. Clara stared at him in disbelief. She remembered the rope around her wrists. The silver-changing hands. The fear in his cold gray eyes when Takoda had interrupted his plans. You call that rescue? She asked. Granger's smile faded. The captain looked confused. What do you mean? Clara took a slow step backward, away from the soldiers. Then another. Finally, she stood beside Takoda. I won't go. The valley became completely still. The captain blinked. Miss Whitmore, these are Apaches. I know exactly who they are. You belong with your own people. Clara lifted her chin. My own people sold me. She pointed directly at Granger. He traded me like property. Murmurs spread through both groups. Granger quickly interrupted. She's confused. No, Clara replied firmly. I'm finally seeing clearly. She turned toward the Apache warriors. Takoda never treated me as his prisoner. He gave me food. He gave me shelter. And when he could have claimed ownership over my life, he gave me something no one else did. She paused. A choice. The word struck the camp with unexpected force. Even Nantan lowered his eyes. Takoda looked at Clara in silent surprise. She had been free to leave at any time. Yet she had chosen to stay. Not because she was afraid. Because she trusted him. Silas Granger's face twisted with anger. She's lying. Takoda stepped forward until he stood between Clara and the traitor. His voice remained calm, but every word carried unmistakable authority. If you wish to take her, he said, ask her again. The captain turned to Clara. Miss Whitmore, will you come with us? She answered without hesitation. No. The single word echoed across the valley. The soldiers exchanged uncertain glances. They could clearly see she was neither restrained nor frightened. The captain slowly lowered his hat. It appears, he said to Granger, that she has made her decision. Granger protested furiously, but no one listened. The cavalry turned their horses and rode away, taking the furious trader with them. As the dust settled, Nantan walked toward Clara. For several moments he said nothing. Then he bowed his head. I judged you unfairly, he admitted. You protected our children, and today you protected our honor. Clara offered a gentle smile. I only spoke the truth. That evening, the council gathered beneath the stars. Before the entire camp, Dakota declared that Clara was no longer a guest under his protection alone, she was a trusted friend of the Apache people. As the firelight danced across the faces around her, Clara realized something she had never expected. The hidden valley no longer felt like the place where she had been taken. It had become the first place since her father's death that truly felt like home. Autumn arrived quietly in the Arizona territory, painting the cottonwood trees along the valley stream with shades of gold. Cool winds replaced the blistering summer heat, and for the first time in many months, the Apache camp knew something close to peace. Children played freely between the lodges. Hunters returned with fresh game. Even the elders smiled more often as they watched the community heal from the hardships of the past. For Clara, the valley had become more than a refuge, it had become her home. She no longer struggled with the Apache language, and every morning she worked beside Ayanna, preparing meals, treating minor injuries with herbs, and teaching the younger children to read simple English words by drawing letters in the sand. Dakota often watched from a distance. Though he still spoke little, there was warmth in his eyes whenever Clara laughed with the children. The cold barrier he had built around his heart was slowly crumbling, even if he refused to admit it. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Clara found him standing on the ridge overlooking the valley. It is beautiful, she said, joining him. Dakota nodded. It has always been beautiful. She smiled. But now you actually stop long enough to notice. A faint chuckle escaped him. It was soft and brief, but it was unmistakably a laugh. Clara looked at him in surprise. I wasn't sure you remembered how. He shook his head with quiet amusement. I had almost forgotten. For a few peaceful moments, they stood together, watching the fading light wash over the desert. Then a distant horn echoed through the canyon. Dakota's smile vanished. Scouts came galloping toward the camp. Soldiers, one shouted. Many soldiers. The peaceful evening exploded into frantic movement. Women hurried children toward the caves hidden behind the cliffs. Warriors gathered rifles, bows, and ammunition. Fires were quickly extinguished so smoke would not reveal the camp's full size. Dakota climbed onto a rocky ledge overlooking the valley. Below him stretched a long line of cavalry soldiers advancing through the pass. Their numbers were far greater than before. At their front rode Silas Granger. He had returned. Beside him, he pointed directly toward the valley. There, he shouted. The Apache attacked innocent settlers. Destroy the camp. Clara's heart filled with horror. He's lying. Dakota never took his eyes off the approaching troops. He wants revenge. The first cannon blast shook the valley. Smoke filled the air as rocks shattered along the cliffs. The battle had begun. Warriors rushed into position while arrows flew from hidden ledges. Rifle fire echoed from every direction. The narrow canyon slowed the cavalry, allowing the Apache to defend their home with courage and skill. Clara stayed with Ayanna inside one of the caves, helping frightened children remain calm. Suddenly, a frightened little girl cried out. My brother. The girl's younger brother had been left behind near one of the lodges. Without hesitation, Clara ran into the open. The little boy stood frozen beside a burning wagon as soldiers advanced through the smoke. Dakota saw him at the same moment. No. He charged across the battlefield. Bullets struck the ground around him as he reached the child, lifting the frightened boy into one arm. Just as he turned back toward safety, a rifle cracked from the ridge above. Dakota staggered. A dark stain spread across his buckskin shirt. Dakota! Clara screamed. Ignoring the danger, she rushed toward him. Together they carried the boy behind a line of boulders while several Apache warriors covered their escape. The fighting continued until sunset. Unable to force their way through the narrow valley, the exhausted cavalry finally withdrew, carrying their wounded with them. Silas Granger disappeared with the retreating soldiers, his plan once again defeated. But the victory came at a terrible cost. Dakota collapsed shortly after the battle. The bullet had passed through his side, and he had lost a dangerous amount of blood. For 2 days he drifted in and out of consciousness while Ayanna and Clara worked tirelessly to stop the bleeding. On the third night, Clara sat alone beside him. She gently wiped the sweat from his forehead. "You have to stay with us," she whispered. His eyes slowly opened. For a long moment, he simply looked at her. "I thought," he said weakly, "my heart was buried beside my wife, and my daughter." Tears filled Clara's eyes. "You don't have to carry that pain alone anymore." Dakota reached for her hand with trembling fingers. "When I bought your freedom." He paused to catch his breath. "I believed I was saving a stranger." His voice broke. "But you saved me." A tear slipped down Clara's cheek as she squeezed his hand. "I love you, Dakota." For the first time in years, the proud Apache warrior allowed himself to cry. Not from pain. Not from fear. But from the overwhelming relief of knowing that the love he believed had died long ago had found its way back to him. Outside the lodge, dawn slowly broke over the valley. The battle had scarred the land, but it had also broken the walls around a warrior's wounded heart. And as the first rays of sunlight reached the mountains, Clara knew that whatever trials still lay ahead, they would face them together, not as rescuer and captive, but as two souls who had healed each other's deepest wounds. Winter settled gently over the Arizona territory. The desert nights grew colder, and a thin layer of frost often covered the valley before sunrise. Yet inside the Apache camp, hope had returned. Dakota survived. His recovery was slow, and for many weeks he could not ride or even walk without assistance. Clara remained by his side every day, changing his bandages, preparing herbal medicines with Ayanna, and making certain he rested despite his constant desire to return to his duties. "You are a stubborn man," Clara teased one morning as she caught him trying to lift a saddle. Dakota smiled sheepishly. "I am a warrior. You are also recovering from a bullet wound. I heal faster when I work." She folded her arms and shook her head. "You heal faster when you listen." The nearby children laughed, and even Dakota surrendered with a quiet chuckle. "I suppose," he admitted, "you are becoming the stronger one." Months earlier, no one would have imagined the feared Apache warrior smiling so easily. The man once known for his silence now greeted the children, shared meals with the elders, and occasionally joined the evening stories around the campfire. His people noticed the change. So did Clara. One afternoon, a rider arrived beneath a white flag from the nearest military fort. Unlike the previous expeditions, this messenger carried no weapons in his hands. He carried documents. The commanding officer requested a meeting with Dakota. Although many warriors remained suspicious, Dakota agreed. The meeting took place in a clearing between the valley and the fort. Clara stood beside Dakota as several officers approached respectfully. The captain removed his hat. "I owe both of you an apology." Dakota remained silent. The captain continued. "We captured Silas Granger 3 weeks ago." Clara's heart quickened. He confessed everything. The officer handed over several signed statements. He admitted selling innocent people into forced labor, lying to the army, bribing witnesses, and provoking attacks between settlers and Apache bands for his own profit. Clara slowly read the confession. Every lie. Every crime. Every betrayal. It was all there in writing. The court found him guilty, the captain said quietly. He will spend the rest of his life in prison. A long silence followed. For years, hatred and greed had driven men like Granger to divide people who might otherwise have lived in peace. Now, at last, the truth had come to light. There is something else, the captain added. He turned toward Clara. Miss Whitmore, the government recognizes you as a free citizen. He offered her an official document. If you wish, we can arrange transportation back to Tucson. Any property that can legally be restored to you will be returned. Clara looked down at the paper. Months ago, she would have accepted without hesitation. It represented the life she had lost. The only life she had ever known. She glanced toward Dakota. He stood quietly, saying nothing. He would never ask her to stay. Just as he had promised on the night she first arrived, the choice would always be hers. Clara folded the document carefully and handed it back to the captain. I appreciate your kindness. The officer smiled. Then you'll come with us. She shook her head gently. My home is here. The captain looked surprised. You are certain? Clara smiled as she reached for Dakota's hand. I've never been more certain of anything. Dakota looked at her with quiet wonder. The choice was freely made. Not through fear. Not through obligation. But through love. The captain nodded respectfully. Then I wish you both peace. As the soldiers rode away, the valley seemed quieter than ever before. A few weeks later, the Apache gathered for a joyful celebration beneath the stars. Around a great fire, elders offered blessings while children scattered flower petals across the ground. With the tribe as their witnesses, Dakota and Clara pledged their lives to one another. There were no grand speeches. No expensive rings. Only joined hands, honest hearts, and promises spoken beneath an endless sky. Years passed. The hidden valley became known as a place where travelers in need found food instead of fear. Dakota earned respect not only as a courageous warrior but as a wise leader who sought peace whenever honor allowed. Clara became beloved among the people, caring for the sick, teaching children from both Apache and settler families, and helping bridge two worlds that had long been divided by mistrust. Together they opened their home to orphan children, Apache children who had lost parents in conflict and settler children left alone by hardship. Around their hearth, no child was judged by the color of their skin or the language they first learned to speak. One spring evening, many years later, Clara and Dakota stood once again on the ridge overlooking the valley where their journey had begun. Children's laughter drifted upward on the breeze. Dakota slipped his hand into hers. You once believed I had no heart, he said with a smile. Clara laughed softly. I was wrong. She rested her head against his shoulder. It was never gone. It was only buried beneath sorrow, waiting for someone brave enough to help me find it again. As the sun dipped behind the distant mountains, husband and wife watched their family below, a family built not by blood or conquest, but by compassion, forgiveness, and love. And in a land that had witnessed so much hatred, their story became a quiet reminder that even the coldest heart can bloom again when it is touched by kindness.